A dangerous storm system is barreling across the country right now, and by the time you finish watching this, the setup for a major tornado outbreak will already be in motion. This is not a normal severe weather day. What we are watching unfold is a multi-day, multi-hazard weather disaster in the making, and it is going to touch millions of people from the northern plains all the way to the east coast. We are talking damaging winds strong enough to snap power poles, hail large enough to total a car, tornadoes that could be on the ground long enough to become truly catastrophic, and on top of all of that, a flash flood threat that could end up being the most dangerous part of this entire pattern. So let's not waste any time. Let's break down exactly what is happening, where it is happening, and why this week is shaping up to be one of the more active stretches of weather we have seen in a while. Right now, there are two separate severe weather zones firing up at the same time. One is stretched across the northern plains, and the other is centered over the Midwest, reaching all the way into the Ohio Valley. Both of these zones are being fed by the same broad energetic pattern, and both of them have the ingredients in place for something to go seriously wrong. We are talking about a textbook setup, strong wind shear layered on top of rich instability, with a boundary sitting right in the middle of it all, just waiting for storms to fire along it. When you get that kind of setup, you don't just get scattered thunderstorms. You get the kind of storms that rotate, that intensify quickly, and that can spin up a tornado with very little warning. Let's start with what is happening today, because this is where the most immediate danger is. There is a large slight risk of severe weather stretching from southern Minnesota through Chicago and even into northwest Ohio. On top of that, there's another slight risk sitting over the Dakotas, and a broad marginal risk running from Pennsylvania all the way back into Montana. Inside that marginal zone, every single type of severe weather is on the table. But if you want to know what the biggest concern is for today, it is damaging wind. We could see a corridor set up across South Dakota where wind gusts blow well past 75 miles an hour, maybe even touching 80. That is enough force to snap trees, rip off roofing, and turn anything that isn't secured into a projectile. If you live in that corridor, now is the time to bring in anything loose in your yard, because by this afternoon it could be flying. Hail is also a real concern today, especially across North Dakota and South Dakota, where we could see hail the size of baseballs falling from the sky. That kind of hail does not just dent a car, it can shatter windshields and punch through roofing material. And interestingly, if you look at the shape of this hail threat on the map, it actually traces out something close to the outline of a glass slipper stretching across the northern tier of the country. It's a strange little detail, but it tells you just how organized and widespread this hail corridor really is. Now let's talk about the tornado threat, because this is the part that deserves your full attention. On paper, today's tornado risk is officially listed at only 2%. That might sound low, and in isolation it is. But there are two things working against that low number. First, this risk zone includes a heavily populated corridor, meaning even a small chance of a tornado puts a lot of people in harm's way. Second, and more importantly, I would not be surprised if today produces a strong tornado, potentially rated an EF2 or higher. The reason for that concern comes down to the setup itself. There is expected to be a round of thunderstorms this morning, and depending on how that first wave behaves, it could leave behind a boundary. If a supercell manages to form along that leftover boundary later in the day, it would be working with an environment loaded with wind shear, which is exactly the kind of ingredient that turns an ordinary storm into a tornado producer. If you live in northern Illinois, northern Indiana, or southern Michigan, this is your day to stay weather aware. Keep multiple ways to receive warnings, whether that is a weather radio, a phone alert, or a dedicated warning service, because if a supercell fires up this afternoon or evening, things could escalate quickly and without much lead time. Tonight, the setup around Chicago is genuinely uncertain, and that uncertainty is part of what makes it dangerous. One of the more reliable short-range models is barely showing anything developing near the city this evening, while another guidance suggests we could see discrete supercells fire after 6 o'clock. If that happens, and if those storms manage to stay separate rather than merging into a line, the environment is primed enough that a significant tornado threat becomes very real. This is genuinely a coin flip situation. It could be a quiet evening, or it could be a night that ends up in the history books for the Chicago area. Either way, whatever happens tonight is going to set the stage for what comes next, because the leftover boundary and any lingering storm energy will directly influence tomorrow's severe weather. Speaking of tomorrow, the threat does not disappear, it simply shifts. On Monday, the severe weather zone slides to the south and east, with a slight risk running from Springfield, Illinois, through far western Pennsylvania near Pittsburgh, and a broader marginal risk stretching from Philadelphia and New York City back into Nebraska and South Dakota. Damaging wind remains the number one concern, but we could also see some large hail develop across the central plains. And once again, a low-end tornado threat will be in play, this time centered on a corridor running from Peoria back into Champaign, and extending into Canton, Cleveland, Columbus, and Fort Wayne. If you live in any of those cities, you are under at least a low tornado risk tomorrow. And that is not something to brush off, especially given how active this pattern has already proven to be. By Tuesday, the severe weather threat expands even further. We are looking at a large risk zone stretching from the Dakotas all the way back into Richmond and Norfolk on the East Coast. Damaging wind looks like the primary driver of this threat, but a tornado risk cannot be ruled out either, especially given how much energy is going to be moving through the atmosphere by that point. And this is also where a second major hazard starts to take over the story, because Monday night into Tuesday, we begin watching for an increasing flash flood threat across the Ohio Valley, one that could stretch all the way through Wednesday and even Thursday. Let's slow down and really dig into the timing here, because the next 24 to 48 hours are going to determine a lot. This morning and into early afternoon, a weaker line of thunderstorms is expected to push across Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois. The primary concern with this line is straight-line damaging wind, but an isolated tornado cannot be completely ruled out either. If you are anywhere near Milwaukee or Chicago, stay alert through these morning hours for the possibility of both damaging gusts and a brief tornado. As this line pushes into Michigan during the afternoon, it should begin to weaken, but it could still produce gusty winds strong enough to knock out power in scattered locations. The real wildcard is what happens after that initial line moves through. There's a real possibility that new, more organized storms fire up near Chicago later this evening. If that happens, we are talking about rotating supercells with access to a genuinely dangerous wind shear environment, one that significantly raises the odds of a serious tornado. But if that development fizzles instead, the bigger concern shifts toward flash flooding, because any storms that do form are not expected to move quickly. When thunderstorms stall or crawl instead of pushing through an area, they can dump extreme amounts of rain in a very short window, and that sets the stage for dangerous flash flooding, especially in urban areas with poor drainage. Overnight, a line of thunderstorms is likely to develop, and this line will likely bring another surge of damaging wind gusts before finally pushing east. Now, depending on how that overnight round evolves, Monday could look very different depending on where you live. If leftover storms remain active into the morning, places like Pennsylvania and Ohio could see a round of straight-line wind damage early in the day. Otherwise, a fresh round of thunderstorms is expected to explode during the mid to late afternoon, particularly in the corridor just east of Indianapolis, stretching toward Columbus and Cincinnati. This is where we could see extreme downburst winds, some large hail, and potentially an isolated tornado. As this cluster of storms moves eastward, it is expected to push over the Appalachian Mountains, carrying its energy and moisture with it. Overnight Monday into Tuesday, guidance suggests we could see not one, but two additional clusters of thunderstorms developing across the Ohio Valley. If that scenario plays out, it raises the odds significantly of a serious flash flood event, layered with the possibility of isolated severe weather mixed in. At the same time, another line of storms could be tracking across Iowa and Minnesota during those same overnight hours, bringing yet another round of damaging wind gusts to that region. All of this sets up the potential for an unusually powerful line of thunderstorms Tuesday afternoon, one that lines up closely with the broader, severe weather outlook already in place, stretching from near Chicago all the way back toward Virginia. Here's the part that really concerns me, though. Notice how there's a real possibility of multiple rounds of storms overlapping across Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois, all tracking roughly from northwest to southeast. When storm systems train over the same corridor like that, repeatedly dumping rain on the exact same communities, it creates the recipe for a dangerous, potentially life-threatening flash flood event. This is not just an inconvenience. This is the kind of setup that has led to water rescues, washed-out roads, and worst-case scenarios in the past. Even though any single round of rain might only last 3 or 4 hours, when you stack multiple rounds on top of each other over consecutive days, the totals add up fast. Current model guidance is showing localized areas picking up anywhere from 5 to 10 inches of rain through Wednesday night, with some spots potentially topping a foot of total rainfall. That is an extraordinary amount of water to fall in such a short window, and it is more than enough to overwhelm rivers, creeks, and storm drains across the region. I do want to be honest that there is still a lot of uncertainty in exactly where the heaviest rainfall corridor will end up setting up. Just one forecast cycle ago, models were pointing toward the heaviest total sitting closer to Cleveland, and now that same guidance has shifted, showing barely an inch of rain in that same spot. That kind of swing tells you how much this forecast could still change, and it is a good reminder to keep checking back for updates rather than locking in on one single scenario too early. There is also a more immediate flooding concern to watch for tonight, specifically around the Chicago area. Communities like Aurora, Joliet, and DeKalb could see significant flooding develop overnight if thunderstorms behave the way some of the shorter range models are hinting at. If storms do fire up in that area tonight, yes, there is still a tornado risk to be aware of, But the bigger overall danger is likely to be flash flooding, especially with storms expected to barely move and new development continuing to fire from the north. When that happens, the rain just keeps stacking on top of itself instead of spreading out across a wider area. This is not a guaranteed outcome, but if you live near Chicago and you have travel plans tonight, it is worth staying alert and checking conditions before you head out. Looking further ahead, this active pattern does not appear to be slowing down anytime soon. On Wednesday, another round of severe weather looks likely across the Ohio Valley, with damaging wind, hail, and possibly a couple of tornadoes all back on the table. By Thursday, a shortwave trough is expected to move across the Rockies, and while that could spark another round of severe weather, it is still too early to say exactly where that threat will line up. Friday and Saturday remain genuinely uncertain right now. There has been talk of a low pressure system tracking across the northern plains, and earlier guidance suggested it could dive into the Midwest, but the latest trends are pushing that system a bit farther north. If you live in the Midwest, it is still worth keeping an eye on the weekend because there is at least a low-end chance of severe weather returning by Saturday or Sunday. Beyond that point, there is simply too much uncertainty to say with any real confidence what the pattern will look like. On top of all of this severe weather and flooding potential, there is one more thing worth watching closely, and that is the tropics. The Atlantic Ocean is starting to wake up. Right now, there's a tremendous amount of wind shear in place due to the current El Nino pattern, which typically works against tropical development. Even so, we are watching for the possibility of a tropical wave forming later this week, likely just east of the Lesser Antilles. At this point, the system does not look particularly strong, but there is a second wave trailing behind it that could end up being more significant. Neither system currently appears to pose a major threat to land in the short term, but that assessment could easily change as we move further into the week. So this is absolutely something worth continuing to track. Even global model guidance broadly agrees on the setup, showing at least one of these tropical waves developing, though with weaker intensity than some other guidance suggests. It has been a relatively quiet couple of years for landfalling hurricanes in the United States, but that streak will not last forever, and there is a reasonable chance we see at least one hurricane make an impact somewhere in the country before this season wraps up. Before we get to the bottom line, let's talk for a moment about why this particular pattern feels different from a normal run of spring or summer storms. Most severe weather events come and go within a single day, maybe stretching into a second day before the atmosphere resets itself. What makes this setup so concerning is the sheer duration of it. We are not looking at one bad afternoon. We are looking at a rolling, multi-day sequence where the ingredients for severe weather barely let up before the next round moves in. That kind of persistence is exactly what allows secondary hazards, like flash flooding, to build on top of the primary hazard of severe thunderstorms. Ground that is already saturated from one round of storms has far less capacity to absorb the next round, which means rivers and creeks that look manageable today could be pushing toward their banks by the middle of the week. This is also why emergency officials tend to get more concerned the longer an active pattern like this drags on, because fatigue sets in. People hear warning after warning, and there's a real risk of becoming numb to them right around the time the most dangerous storm of the week actually arrives. That is exactly why preparation now matters so much. If you live inside any of the risk zones we just walked through, take a few minutes today to actually think through your plan. Know where the safest room in your home is, ideally a windowless space on the lowest floor. Keep your phone charged, because if power goes out, that device may become your only reliable connection to updated warnings. If you have outdoor plans over the next few days, build in a backup option, and do not assume that clear skies in the morning mean the afternoon will stay that way. This pattern has already shown how quickly things can change in just a matter of hours. So here's the bottom line. We are heading into one of the more active and potentially dangerous stretches of weather in recent memory, with severe storms, flash flooding, and a developing tropical pattern all converging within the same week. If you live anywhere from the northern plains through the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, and into the Northeast, this is the time to make sure you have a reliable way to receive weather alerts, because these threats are going to be evolving quickly and sometimes with very little advance warning. Have a plan for where you will go if a tornado warning is issued. Keep an eye on rising water if you are in a flood-prone area, and do not assume that because today's storms turn out fine, tomorrow's will behave the same way. This pattern is dynamic, it is dangerous, and it is only just getting started,